Pasta al pomodoro, a classic Italian dish, or so one would think. But like so much of what's on our plates today, its ingredients are from all around the world. It is the result of conquest, trade, migration, and invention, the exact same forces that shaped globalization. Pasta al pomodoro is elegant in its simplicity and celebration of natural flavors, made of ingredients that are either in your pantry or could be plucked right out of the garden, if you were an Italian nonna in the 1800s. But the forces that made it possible are anything but simple. Come cook pasta al pomodoro with me while we talk about globalization, the process that made this meal possible and why it is now being reimagined. Now, let's start first with the ingredients in this dish and talk about where they came from. Pasta. Historians are unsure of its precise origins, but many believe it was introduced to Italy through Arab traders. The wheat used to make pasta was first domesticated in the Fertile Crescent of the Middle East. Ironically, the commonly held belief that pasta was derived from Asian noodles is likely incorrect. By the time Marco Polo traveled to China in the 13th century, pasta was already widespread in Italy. The tomato is the ingredient arguably most associated with Italian food today. However, they are native to the Andes and were only brought to Europe after the Spanish colonized the Americas. Italians didn't even consider tomatoes as a staple in their cooking until the 19th century. Basil was first grown in India and Southeast Asia, having been referenced in Vedic texts as far as 5,000 years ago. Garlic and onion is believed to have come from Central Asia. Olive oil did originate from the Mediterranean basin, with long historical and cultural value in the societies of the region, as did Parmesan. So yes, we can say that pasta al pomodoro is Italian, but it's also just as correct to say that it is Middle Eastern, Andean, and South Asian. Put simply, that's what globalization is. Global movement, where people, goods, and ideas move across great distances to influence, morph, and fuse together. The history of the world is synonymous with a history of globalization, but through different processes over time. Globalization has been pushed forward by trade along the Silk Road, by the great European explorers that sailed across the seas, and by the colonialism that followed such exploration. Societies have always interacted with each other, whether it's been in collaboration or combat. With that history behind us, let's zoom in. Globalization, as we've known it since the 1990s, is something unique. It's been defined by free trade, open markets, and international institutions as technology collapsed great distances and migration closed cultural gaps. This version of globalization promised something pretty simple: cheaper goods, greater efficiency, and peace through interdependence. For decades, economists argued that this would be wonderful, that countries would specialize, that the world would integrate, and that everyone would prosper together. And for a while, it did seem to work. Trade lifted billions out of poverty in places like China, Vietnam, and Bangladesh. Many goods did become cheaper. The first color TV sold for $1,295 in 1954, or about $17,000 today when adjusted for inflation. Now, a TV can easily be purchased for under $500. And according to the US Bureau of Labor Statistics, TV prices declined 90% in the 2 decades between 2004 and 2015. As technology has become more advanced and scale makes each unit of production less expensive, goods, and especially imported goods, have generally become cheaper. This has been achieved through ruthless specialization and cost minimization, creating a global supply chain so complex that it became one of the most intricate machines humans have ever built. But globalization came with costs too. In the US and Europe, moving production overseas hollowed out factories and hit small towns hard. They didn't just lose their jobs, they lost a sense of identity. Although, to be fair, studies show automation played an even bigger role in job losses, but that's a story for another time. Even for those who kept their jobs, inequality grew, as the gains went to those who owned capital than to those who earned a paycheck. People also started to feel like they were losing control, so they pushed back, and politicians took notice. Although there were earlier signs, the world woke up to this backlash in the mid-2010s with the election of populist leaders in major economies and the UK's shocking decision to exit from the EU. These politicians idealized a very different world, where countries watched out for their own interests first. They believe that globalization only enriches the elite and dilutes the cultural identity and national sovereignty of countries. Instead, they advocate for self-sufficiency and cultural preservation. This debate around globalization is really at the core of many recent political developments, from the rise of tariffs, more contested immigration policy, subsidies for domestic industry, and withdrawal from global institutions. They all reflect a shifting belief system. Let me give you a few examples. In the US, the Biden administration passed the CHIPS Act in 2022 with over $50 billion in subsidies to build semiconductors at home rather than importing them from Korea and Japan. This is not just about jobs. It is about US self-sufficiency in critical technology that goes into everything from phones to fighter jets. The EU placed tariffs of up to 38% on Chinese electric vehicles to protect their own automobile industry from price undercutting in 2024, citing state subsidies that allow Chinese producers to sell more cheaply. More is likely to come as sectors like medical devices and wind turbines are also under investigation. This is about protecting Europe's own businesses and what it perceives as a defense of fair trade rather than simply free trade. Immigration, or the flow of people, is also tightening. Canada, historically one of the most open countries in the world, announced it is reducing its immigration quota for the next 3 years by 21%, as a strong inflow of people placed pressure on the local housing supply and the healthcare system. Canada is now questioning how to successfully integrate migrants rather than simply attracting the best talent. In many ways, the old logic of globalization, which was efficiency first, is being replaced by a new one: resilience, security, self-sufficiency first, protect our own first. So, where does that leave us? The rapid globalization of the 1990s and 2000s clearly did not work for many people. But it would also be foolish to reject globalization entirely. As this pasta shows, globalization can produce beautiful things that enrich our lives. The question then is how to rebuild, how to create a system that works better. First and foremost, policymakers and economists need to better understand the effects of their policies. They need to recognize who are the winners and who are the losers of any decision. They then need to do a better job of cushioning the losers by redistributing some of the gains from the winners. This is much easier said than done. But it isn't just globalization that is tilting gains increasingly towards a smaller group of winners. Technology, too, is shifting power towards fewer people. Some food for thought. Perhaps time is a missing ingredient here. It took over 3,000 years for basil to migrate from India to Italy, and 200 years for Italians to realize that tomatoes were not poisonous after they were first introduced. In comparison to when wheat was domesticated, new foods and new ideas are being delivered to us at light speed today. We need to realize that humans need time to adapt and are slower to reskill, reorient identities, and adjust expectations than maximum efficiency and productivity would dictate. Good policy doesn't stop change. It softens disruptions and helps people catch up to where the world is headed. If we can achieve that, then globalization can produce more pasta and less division. Because like pasta, globalization depends on how it's made, who it serves, and whether we give people time to acquire its taste. Some just need longer to simmer. What are other dishes that you love that owe their flavor to globalization? Drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If this story inspires you to make pasta al pomodoro, the full recipe is in the description. And if you like your economics with a side of carbs, please subscribe. Thanks for nomming on some economics with me. See you next time.